Hi everyone, this is Mahmoud Sheikh, and in this video I will discuss about various services of operating system. Okay, so here I have listed down the services which are program execution, input output operations, file system manipulation, communication, accounting, error detection, resource allocation, and protecting the system. Okay, so these are the various services of operating system, and in this video we will try to focus only on the first two services of operating system, which are program execution and input and output operations. Okay, and remaining services we will try to cover in upcoming videos. Okay, so now let us first move to our next slide. Okay, so as I have told you that in this video we will only be discussing about program execution and input output operation services. Okay, so now let us start our discussion with the first service, which is program execution. In order to execute a program successfully in a system, operating system has to perform these many duties. Okay, apart from these duties, operating system may also has to perform other duties as well. But with respect to program execution, operating system will be performing these many tasks. So what are those tasks? First task is accomplish the task of loading a program into main memory. Okay, so as I have already told you in my last videos that whenever I will be creating a program inside a computer, first I will be loading that program inside the secondary memory. Okay, when that program is been loaded in secondary memory, that time it is called as a program. Okay, and then we have to move that program inside the main memory. Okay, and when the program reaches inside the main memory, then it is been termed as a process. So that task of loading the program from secondary memory to the main memory has to be accomplished by the operating system. This is one of the tasks of program execution. Once the program has been moved to main memory, and then from the main memory it has to be moved inside the CPU or inside the processor for execution. Okay, so this is how we are preparing our programs to move from secondary memory to main memory, and then from main memory to CPU for executing that program. Next point, initialize program execution. Okay, so operating system prepares the program to get successfully executed inside the CPU. Okay, so for executing that program, operating system has to load the program first in the secondary memory, and then to the main memory, and then inside the CPU. Okay, once the program gets executed successfully, then it will be moved out from the CPU, and then next process from the main memory has to be sent inside the CPU. Okay, next point, it supports normal termination of program after successful execution. Suppose if the program is successfully executed in the CPU, then it's the responsibility of the operating system to supports a normal termination from the CPU. Then it has to send it out of the CPU. Okay, so that other process from the main memory has to send inside the CPU. Next point is provides support for deadlock mechanism. So this is one of the situation in operating system which is called as deadlock, where there will be only one resource and more than one process wants to access that resource. Okay, as we know that we are discussing multitasking system where processor can execute more than one process at a time. Okay, so if at particular point of time more than one process wants to access the same resource, then we will be moving towards the situation of deadlock, where none of the process can get access to that shared resource. Okay, so that situation is deadlock, and during the execution this may be happen that we will be ended up with the situation of deadlock. So in that case, if we ended up with the situation of deadlock, then operating system has to provide the support by allocating that resource to any one of the process, and for allocating that resource to any one of the process it has to make use of various scheduling algorithms. Okay, so that support has to be provided by the operating system at the time of deadlock situation. Next point, displaying error messages in case of abnormal execution. So what if the process didn't get successfully executed inside the CPU? Okay, what if the abnormal execution took place? Then in that case it has to display errors. It has to notify the users that the process which you are trying to execute is not able to successfully execute, okay, because various reasons. Next point, provides support for process communication. Okay, as I have already told you, we are discussing in terms of multitasking systems where processor will be executing more than one process at the same time. Then in that case, this may be happen that one process wants to make a communication with another process, and that mechanism has to be provided by the operating system. This is everything about program execution. Okay, now we will move on to the next service, which is input output operations. Okay, so now in input output operations, the first point is allowing the process to access any input or output device if a request arises in the middle of its execution inside CPU. Okay, so here in this section we will be discussing everything about how various input and output devices will be allocated to the processes by the operating system. Okay, so input and output devices are the resources of a computer system, and how operating system allocate these resources to the requesting processes. So now what this first point says is, if a process is being executed inside the CPU, at that time any output device wants to access that process, and at that point the process which is executed by the CPU needs to be fulfill the request of that input or output device. Okay, so in this situation operating system has to move that process which has been requested by any of the input or output device in the wait state, so that it can move outside the CPU and fulfills the request of that requesting input and output device. Okay, so by that time it's not that CPU has to sit idle. Okay, at that time when the process is been moved to the wait state, operating system will be selecting other process from the main memory and it will be sent inside the CPU to get executed. So we also need to take care that our CPU should not sit idle. CPU always busy in processing one or other process. Okay, so now the next point is accomplish the task of device allocation and controlling the input output devices. So with respect to input and output operations, operating system also needs to allocate the required devices to the requesting processes, and it also needs to control these various devices. Next point, notify device errors, status, etc. Apart from allocating various devices to the processes, it also needs to notify the errors. What if any device is not able to connect with any of the process? Okay, in that case operating system also needs to continuously keep on track the status of various devices which have been allocated to various processes. Okay, so if at any point of time the device which has been allocated to any process is not been used, if that process is no longer using that device, then the particular device has to be deallocated from that process so that the device can be allocated to some other process. Next point, reading or writing any operation with input or output device. Okay, so if at any point of time any process wants to read or write to any input or output device, if any process wants to get input from the user, for that it may require the use of keyboard. If at any point of time any process wants to display the output or send the output to the user, for that it may require the need of printer. Okay, so these things has to be supported by the operating system by allocating these various input and output devices to those requesting processes. Now the last point is operating system grants permission anytime to access input or output device. If any process wants to access any input or output device, then operating system should grant the permission to that process so that the process can access these input and output devices and completes its execution. Okay, so this is everything about the duties of operating system in terms of input and output operations. Okay. So in this video we have discussed a little bit of information regarding program execution and input and output operations, which are two of the services of operating systems. Okay, so I hope you understood whatever we have discussed in this video. Okay, so that's all for this video, guys. If you like this video, click on like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And thanks for watching.